This week, the number of vandalized churches in Canada is soaring. What is behind the hate? The world's largest children's book publisher issues a Pride Month reading list. And the women's softball team at the University of Oklahoma wears their faith on their sleeves to a championship. These stories and much more coming up this week on The Lion, Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion, Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now let's meet our esteemed panel, some of the men and women behind the stories at readlion.com. Josh Mann is managing editor, Michael Ryan, executive editor, and Jillian Schneider, staff writer at The Lion. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
We start this week with something that's a trend in Canada. I suppose it's a trend here, less so, thankfully, for now. Josh, it's vandalized churches in Canada. I don't think I was aware of what was going on up there to our north. 100-plus churches now vandalized?
Yeah, in just the past few years, over 100 have been targeted, have burned, been vandalized. Various things have happened. The latest is St. Anne's Anglican Church in Toronto, which was had a massive fire. Now, in that specific case, they're not sure whether it's arson. They're still investigating. But it is part of a troubling trend. And in Canada, it really began after, in 2021, there was a discovery, media reported, of mass graves outside of a church-run school, historic school. And basically, in the time since those reports came out, they have found 0 human remains. So they used radar to essentially detect some anomaly in the earth, and it was widely reported that they suspected mass graves.
Suggesting that the church was involved in some sort of mass killing or something.
Of students, specifically.
Oh, wow.
And so many of these were Indigenous students. And so there was this whole narrative about perhaps some kind of racial targeting of Indigenous people and mistreatment and abuse. But since that time, I'm not aware of any specific evidence of mass graves, and yet it sparked kind of a backlash against churches and Christian groups because of this. And to their credit, many of the Indigenous peoples actually were the most cautious with the story, although they were certainly interested in it. But it seemed like the media reports just kind of spiraled and helped propel some of that violence against churches. Meanwhile, politicians, for the most part, essentially justified the violence, saying, well, it's kind of understandable given what we've discovered.
Michael Ryan, is this a trend, a troubling trend that's growing?
Absolutely. Oh, my goodness. Smartphones are basically 24-hour news channels now. Anybody with a phone can be a reporter, although not a dispassionate one, not a trained one. We were talking before we got on. An old axiom in journalism is, if your mother says she loves you, check it out.
Yeah.
But nothing's being checked out because nobody with a smartphone has an editor, right? Our national pastime is no longer baseball in America. It is overreacting or reacting too quickly, but not always on the spur of the moment. Compared to Canada, we're seeing violence here in America since the release of the Dobbs decision, or the leak of it, a couple of years ago. 100 plus pro-life facilities vandalized or burned.
So, Jillian, is this the new way for leftists, secularists to wage war? Just falsely frame those who are ideologically on the opposite side and hope to stir up trouble?
Yeah, I think one of the most frightening things we see them doing is using language that tries to justify violence and basically say, any measure of resisting oppression, any sort of effort to overthrow the current regime is acceptable. And it's really frightening because, whether or not you agree with conservative viewpoint or liberal viewpoint, the idea that any means of fighting back against a system is acceptable, even if those means are arguably worse than the system itself, is really frightening. And so the fact that we see people justifying violence against churches, justifying violence against pro-life centers on the grounds that they disagree with their mission is scary, and it should be frightening, because when you use that sort of language, it it doesn't protect anybody. There's no law or justice in that if violence is acceptable, as long as it's the right target.
You know, this week as we watch the SBC convening at this hour as we record this show, and this week as many of some of the outside and some inside the SBC, that's the Southern Baptist Convention, debate things like female clergy. And wherever you feel about that, you know, that is the SBC's position, that men are in the pulpit and that's their position. And the reason I bring that up is because, to me, outside forces are constantly waging war against Christians, sometimes in really ugly ways, like we're seeing in Canada, sometimes in less but still subversive ways, like coming at the Southern Baptist Convention for the way they govern themselves. So as Christians, we've really got to be on point that they're coming, and we've got to be girded and ready for that fight, and not just kind of passively analyze it from the sidelines, but really know where we stand and be engaged, because they're clearly here to play. Up next, University of Arizona, Michael Ryan. DEI seems to be rebuffed in many university settings, even in Harvard I'm reading now. So is this another positive trend, maybe, that DEI is on the wane?
Well, I think so. A lot of people think so. And this report shows that required DEI courses at the University of Arizona are, quote, academically unserious. And we'll get into that, but I think they may be academically unserious, but politically they're deadly serious. They promote, according to this report, politically activist ideologies to a captive audience of students who must complete the programs in order to receive a degree. In other words, it's mandatory. It's college as re-education camp. You know, I've touted Christopher Rufo's book, The American Cultural Revolution, and I really recommend it. And he explains detail after detail about how the militants from the 60s filtered into academia and made that the first place that they fled and flourished. And boy, have they flourished.
Yes.
And in the case of Arizona, they're even weaving grievances into entomology courses where they compare insects to maybe oppressed minorities.
Is there a bigger waste of money in 2024 than college? And I'm asking that seriously. I mean, if you want to be an open heart surgeon, perhaps. But I have 3 teenagers, and I'm hard-pressed, Jillian, to send them to school, to college. I can't, this madness, it is impossible to justify the expense.
Certainly. I mean, especially with the rising cost of college, and I'm not long out of college myself, but even just looking at some of the course descriptions, it's kind of baffling that these classes are offered. They don't seem to be asking what I would consider serious questions or, doing serious research about these topics. And I think, especially when it comes to DEI, that these classes often are putting the cart before the horse. They already know what they want students to take away from this ideologically. They're not, having an open field of research where people are, encouraged to come away with their own conclusions. And one of the things that baffled me most about this particular case was that one of the class kind of learning requirements was to, quote unquote, center one or more marginalized populations, such as a racial minority, LGBTQIA+, disabled people, something like that. And my question is, what is centering? Like, what does it mean to center something? I don't even know. Like, I went to college. I have a degree. I don't know what that means. And it's just, the language is totally nonsensical to me. Yeah,
generally, anytime you're in the center of anything, like the road, you'll get run over. So I don't know. I will say this, though. I just saw in the Wall Street Journal this week that the hashtag blue collar is becoming a thing on social media. And there was a woman featured in the piece. She's 20-something years old, and she's got 2 million followers across her social media platforms because they're following the story of this woman getting into electrical work instead of having gone to school. And the Wall Street Journal chronicled this trend of kids getting into blue-collar work and abandoning college altogether. I pray that means the disintegration of higher education as we know it. I'm prayerful we just blow up the system and start anew. Josh?
Well, and I'll tell you, I mean, as somebody who went through school about as long as I could possibly go, all the way through a PhD, education and a degree are different things.
Yes.
And I think great education can start in a home. It can start in a school with a young person. But there's a big difference in growing in your knowledge and then paying exorbitant amounts of money to get, a diploma that is inflated that may actually do you no good in the marketplace. And so I think that it's important that parents now just do their due diligence and consider not only how can I help my child grow, how can I help them learn what they need to learn for life, for faith, for whatever, but then thinking about career a little bit differently and not just assuming that college is the ticket to a great career, because the trades have a huge need right now. There's as boomers retire, the trades actually are kind of in a drought in terms of bringing in new folks to do those jobs. They pay really well. One of my best friends did not go to college and probably earns as much or more than I do. And so there are lots of ways to make a career, and college is not the only option.
Yeah, I'm going to pay a lot more for the guy next door to come fix my toilet than I am the lesbian French poetry major next door to come over and give me a lecture. I know that much. Michael Ryan, is the college degree overinflated? I mean, you have hired and interviewed writers, I'm sure, for other publications in your capacity in a leadership role. Having a college degree means you can write well, for instance? Not necessarily, I'd bet.
Well, all I can tell you is that at a newspaper I worked, we had a faculty member from a university come in for kind of a summer internship. And we're not sure what he put out that summer. I mean, it was an academic exercise, really. And I'm sitting here thinking, listening to you guys, 7 years of college down the drain.
Yeah, it's hard to argue. Jillian, you just wrote a story. In fact, you've done quite a bit of study lately. You've taken a dive into the numbers of the money being spent in various school districts like Philadelphia and New York City, and the numbers not surprising. All the money in the world being thrown at these systems, it's not working.
No, it's not. And in New York City, it's gotten to the point where they're specifically giving more money to schools that are losing students. So they're basically overinflating their budgets. And the reason for that is because, like everywhere else, COVID funds from the federal government are ending because COVID's over. Shocking. And so New York City is going to lose about $2.5 billion in federal funding for the upcoming school year, but they're just basically replacing it by increasing their local funding by $2 billion, and then their state funding is also going up by several $100 million. And it's really disturbing because the narrative around this that's coming from teachers and administrators and the education establishment is that if this extra funding isn't given, it's somehow a budget cut to
Yes.
lose the one-time COVID funds, that it's a budget cut and that they'll be underfunding students. And it really just shows how entitled the public school system thinks it is to the taxpayer's wallet, that they, for a few years, received this one-time funding that was meant to deal with, what was a global crisis. And now that money's going away, they're basically acting like toddlers and stomping their foot and saying, no, we want it back. We want more money.
This is every time official Washington gives a stimulus or issues some sort of aid specifically to schools, they act as though that is their new baseline of operations for money going forward. And when they get that one-time infusion and they tell the public that that's their new standard operating budget, well, naturally that's going to go away, and then they lie to people and manipulate them and tell them it's a cut. It's as deceitful as it gets, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, you can't hardly shrink parts of government that grow. And, public education is a huge part of government. And, personally, I think it's important. I personally think that we need an educated public. But how we're doing it and this assumption that we just need to spend more money to get better results is just false. And we see it proven over and over and over again. And yet we continue to hear this argument that we just need to spend more money. I don't know what happened. I'm wondering did they know? I mean, they must have known, because a 13-year-old knows if you get birthday money, you can't assume you're going to get it the next month. It's your birthday.
That's right.
And yet maybe they knew and they thought, you know what, we're just going to build it in and we're going to put the onus back on them when this runs out, and maybe we'll just get more money out of it. I don't know.
Yeah, Michael, it is. You hear it, and it's not just in schools. This is what happens when government sends stimulus money for roads or whatever. This always happens. They make everyone believe that this is the new operating standard with a one-time cash infusion.
Well, and to put that cash into shrinking enrollment is odd. Imagine a business ad in the private sector. Now, pay more for less. I mean, only in government do you see that. It's almost an incentive to lose students because you get more money for fewer students, less work maybe. But it's not as big an incentive as the curriculum is to lose students. It's also a disincentive to compete for students at a time when competition for students is ramping up like never before. It's odd.
Josh Mann, I was talking off the top of the show about attacks on Christianity and how I think Christians ought to take a firmer stand and be eyes wide open about what we face. It always pleases me, and these are the stories that you'll find at readline.com, when people do just that. It's the softball team, women's softball team in Oklahoma?
That's right. The Oklahoma Sooners collegiate women's softball team has won its 4th straight national championship. It's the first time that it's ever happened in the sport. They were only the second three-peat team in the last 30 or so years. What makes this softball team really fun to watch is not only their talent, but it's their faith. And actually, they're very open. Many of the players are Christians. Many of the players who come onto the team become Christians during their time there just because of the influence of the other Christians on the team. They'll publicize their baptisms. Teammates baptize one another. And it's neat to watch these young ladies be bold in their faith, play their sport at the highest level. And in fact, if you go to the article, if the audience will go to the article, they can find some links to various videos in the semifinal game before Oklahoma made it. They were playing, I think it was Florida, and they were down to their last out, and you see this girl in the batter's box. She's about to step up to hit, and a teammate comes over, and this is during the broadcast, and you know she's praying. They both close their eyes, they're praying, sends her up to the plate, and I think it was a 2-1 count. Just knocks a homer out of the park.
Wow.
It was a walk-off home run. And immediately after, she's interviewed in the presser and just said, you know, my teammate prayed over me. I just went up. I had all the peace in the world. God gave me the peace. She wasn't saying God won us the game, but she was just saying her faith gave her the peace she needed to go up there and just do what she does.
Is this, here we are in Pride Month, Michael Ryan. There's no shortage of parades and flag flying about that. Is this the Christian anecdote to that? More of it from Christians, wearing it proudly and proclaiming it proudly.
Yeah, it's almost illegal, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't see that in the public square much. I was thinking about, praying over a batter before they go up to the plate. All those meetings at the mound in MLB, where they cover their mouth. Are they praying? I'm wondering now.
Maybe.
I'm thinking. Now, you probably remember Billy Martin, the famous New York Yankees manager, kicking dirt on an umpire. I bet he was praying for him. I don't have any incense right now. Here's some dirt. Take it. The thing is, all winning teams, all championship teams, have two characteristics in common: commitment and belief. And belief can be not just in ourselves, but in a higher power. The Celtics coach was asked recently, his name is Joe Mazzulla. He was asked recently at a press conference about having two black head coaches in the NBA Finals. His answer was, I wonder how many of those have been Christian coaches. Mm-hmm. And he just let that go. And nobody said a word. And somebody commented, I love Joe Mazzulla. His identity is not in his melanin level. His identity is not in his job or success in that job. His identity is in Jesus Christ.
Yes.
The best part about sports icons mentioning God is they're mentioning God.
Amen.
Because they're so high profile, they're in the public square, and public schools and public officials and the media and maybe your friends don't want you to. And maybe that's a good sign you should.
Jillian, it reminds me of the story that got quite a bit of traction when Harrison Butker gave that commencement speech a couple, 3 weeks ago or more. A lot of people trashed it, but you know who didn't? His teammates. When they finally were all asked about it, his teammates left it alone. Now, maybe they don't agree with what he said, but they couldn't argue that the man was a decent man, and because he speaks boldly about his faith, they had nothing but positive things to say about him. Is this the anecdote? Is this culturally what we've got to do as Christians?
I think so. And I think it shows that your greatest sphere of influence is the people that you work with every day. It's great to have people like this on the media. I completely agree with Michael. It's great to have Harrison Butker, giving commencement speeches to students and sharing that message. But at the end of the day, our most powerful testimony is going to be to our teammates, whether teammates are coworkers or family members or friends or, people we go to church with or any number of people that are within our sphere, who we do life with, that those are the people that are going to see really how we live our lives day in and day out and how Christ affects us. And so the fact that this softball team is a group of women who are a testimony to the world about the importance of faith and the power of faith, and also a testimony to each other, and who bring people in and share Christ with their teammates, I think is powerful and beautiful. And it goes to show you that really it's the people that are closest to you that you get to have the biggest impact on.
Yeah, well said. It's not about shutting anybody up. As I mentioned, Pride Month, Michael, the world's largest book publisher for children, Scholastic, has a pride guide, for heaven's sakes. So there is no compunction whatsoever about most of mainstream culture celebrating and shoving this pride notion in everyone's faces. So again, this to me, it just seems like an easy no-brainer. Okay, I'm not asking you to shut up, but don't expect me to shut up about my Christian faith in opposition.
Yeah, I challenge you to read our story at readlion.com about this, because Scholastic put out that Pride Guide with a reading list, glossary for teachers. I challenge you to figure out what all those words are in that story. And try to spell them at the National Spelling Bee next year. It's just ridiculous. You can't, you got to buy a program to come up with all of these terms for different variations of sexuality. You can't name them without a program. It seems like we discover a new species of human every week. And it's woven through all these academic disciplines now. Maybe, in entomology, maybe we need to get it in a bug class.
Yeah.
But, and it's following the path of DEI-CRT, because that burrowed itself deeply into academia starting in the 60s and 70s, and now it's deeply in there. The question is, how are states and school districts going to handle all this? For instance, in Florida, this kind of material might be illegal in the lower grades.
Yeah, Josh, this is again. It's there is no shortage of this being peddled, the secular culture being peddled in just about every way, and it continues to infuriate me when I consider that they're not content to leave it there. They'll try to move it into church if they can. They're actively attacking church organizations, evangelical groups. It's relentless. It's just relentless every turn.
Yeah, they absolutely believe in it. In fact, in the explanation from Scholastic, they seem to be pretty intentional about their effort to indoctrinate, and I think that's a fair word. I don't think that word is always fair, but I think in this case it is. They say books and literature are never neutral, which is true, by the way. By engaging with queer literature for children and young adults, you are disrupting the status quo that implies being cisgender, heterosexual, and allosexual. Don't ask me what all those are.
Allosexual?
I know what a few of those are.
Like aloe vera?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I know what it means, but I have a little Greek background, so not everybody does.
Oh, well, okay.
Are the default. You are showing children an expanded way of thinking and being that validates all children and all people. The question is, okay, these books are for ages 0 to 12. Why are we centering, to use another word we don't know exactly what means, these sexual topics for kids? Why do we insist that they learn all of the ways that different adults want to think about their own sexuality? Maybe they don't need to learn that when they're 3 years old or 5 years old or 7 years old. And that's why critics accuse some of those folks with these radical ideologies of grooming. That's what that's what their concern is.
Jillian, I know I lean on you a lot because you're a mother very soon. You're going to be a mother soon. You hear stories like this, and Josh makes the point, we're talking about kids 0 to 3. You're not far off from having one. I mean, do you think about what they'll experience when they get out there in this world?
Yeah, absolutely I do. And I think everybody has some awkward story about when they ask their parents about the birds and the bees or vice versa, but it's frightening that the weightiness of these topics, and because these are some serious adult stuff, and the fact that the left is making light of it in some sense. It's trying to dress it up with, rainbows and unicorns and make it all, fun and gearing it towards little kids and asking small children to wrestle with huge concepts of self-identity and romance and sexuality and all of these things that, little kids don't care about that. The little kids want to know what's for lunch. Little kids want to know what they're getting for their birthday. 7-year-olds don't need to be sitting there thinking about self-actualization and identity and all of these very weighty topics. They're appropriate at a certain age, but when you're a kid, you're just a kid. And these ideas, I think, really can mess people up when you force this stuff on them.
And in fact, Jillian, I'll stick with you because, Kirk Cameron and the Brave Books people have come out with a series, not just on television, but a series of different children's books, and you've chronicled a little bit of their work. He's about to go on another tour. They're trying to actively counter this culturally, and I think they're having some great success with it. What do you know?
Yeah, Brave Books and Kirk Cameron and a number of other authors have done a great job of kind of bringing back wholesome children's literature, honestly, and literature that has a positive message. They're not fighting fire with fire. They're not trying to tear people down. They're promoting virtues like courage and hope and love, genuine love, not what the pride people say love is. They're trying to bring back optimism and highlight and center what is true and good and beautiful in the world. And so he's had great success touring libraries. He announced that they're going to do an event this year that they did last year called See You at the Library, where they're trying to get people just to come to their local libraries, have libraries host this event. It's going to be on August 24th this year. And the point is just to bring these ideas, bring these virtues back into the public spaces and into our kind of collective consciousness, and to focus on that and bring positivity and virtue and not the icky stuff.
Michael, you wrote a story, kind of a companion story on this in Missouri, where the Secretary of State last year, as I understand it, kind of forced this issue on public libraries as well. Can you explain?
And they didn't take it.
They didn't take it.
Yeah. No, the Missouri Secretary of State last year passed a rule saying the libraries had to adopt a written policy determining what material is age appropriate in their libraries. But we got a hold of a new card holder notice that the new card holder got from a public library here in the Kansas City area. And it basically said, you're on your own, that we don't monitor what the kids check out. If you don't like it, take the cards away, check out stuff on your own card. In fact, one of our freelance writers took his 3-year-old to one of the libraries and ran into an objectionable book, what he thought was objectionable, and he won't go back. So the bottom line is libraries don't care what's going into kids' hands, and parents, in my experience in reporting on this, don't know. The legacy media aren't telling them. The school boards, when you get a chance to excerpt one of these books, won't let you because it's too indecent for a meeting of adults. And there's a war on for control of kids, for their minds, for their souls. The first rule of war is to know that you're in one. And in this one, there's not going to be a Pearl Harbor to wake us up. This is guerrilla warfare. If they could cyber hack your kids' minds, they absolutely would.
Yeah. And to call this book burning, that's one of the insidious lies they tell, that if we don't want to sexualize a 3-year-old, we're Nazi book burners. I mean, go to hell with that, by the way. But anyway, Josh Mann, is this something that we're going to be able to rein in, or we're just going to have to create an entire subculture where brave books exist on a parallel track?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where we're headed. I think that culturally in this country, we're a lot more siloed in terms of perspectives than we've been in a very long time, maybe ever. And if I think parallel tracks might be the way that we continue to see things go. I think parents, though, they need to be involved. I mean, you cannot just hand a phone to your kid and tell them to watch YouTube, or the equivalent of just send them into the library. I mean, we can talk about books, but I think we can also talk about content. And there's a lot of content out there from all different perspectives. I haven't seen many people or anyone really argue that we just shouldn't let them have any access ever to any of these things. Like you say, we're not burning books. We're just saying give parents the key to the door and let parents make those decisions and help their kids handle these things at age-appropriate times.
Before we close today's show, we always like to go around the horn and ask the great writers and contributors at readlion.com what their favorite story of the week is. Jillian, we start with you. What do you like out there?
Well, one of my favorite stories from this week is from Philadelphia. They have a relatively small school choice program there that takes advantage of the state tax credit donation laws. But they just did a report on their students that found that these are low-income students. Most of them are minority students, but students that use private school scholarships and are able to attend a private school instead of a public school have basically double the proficiency rate in reading and math than public school students. And, this program is fairly limited, but it's exciting to imagine what a statewide program in Pennsylvania could accomplish if just a very small program in Philadelphia can already double proficiency rates.
Michael Ryan?
Well, not because I did it, but the story about the books in the library that parents don't know about, I think is a very important story. Parents need to know these things. The library's response to me was, quote, items are shelved in the locations congruent with the age group designations provided by publishers. So passing the buck above and below. They're saying, we're just doing what the publishers tell us to do, and parents, it's up to you to decide whether that's proper or not. Parents are increasingly, the ones that are aware of this, are increasingly finding libraries dangerous for their kids and hostile to their values.
Josh Mann.
I'm going to go back to that Oklahoma story we just talked about. I think that these young ladies who are just open and honest about their faith set a great example for all Christians in the culture. You don't have to be an influencer. You don't have to have a megaphone. You can just be yourself, be open about your faith. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed, and just be yourself. And I think that would be a great thing if more Christians did it.
Beautifully said. That's going to do it for this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. ReadLion.com is the site where you can find all these stories and much, much more every single day. And until next time, for all of us at The Lion, thanks for downloading the show. We'll see you again.